My son's wedding should have been my proudest day, but instead I was shoved aside, labeled afterthought, and humiliated in front of strangers. They thought I was done, easy to silence, while they schemed to grab the $24.5 million penthouse. What they didn't know was that I was the owner, and I was ready to remind them. This was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in my living room that evening, the silence pressing in on me like a heavy curtain. The house was dim, the last of the autumn light falling through the windows and catching on the dust that floated in the air. Everything around me carried memories. The photograph of Margaret, my late wife, rested on the mantel, her smile frozen in the frame as if she were still urging me to stand tall. The old leather sofa sagged a little where she used to sit. Beside me on the table was the pocket watch she had given me on our 25th anniversary, the one I had planned to pass to David on his wedding day. My hands lingered on it, cold metal against skin, a reminder of time spent, time given, and time wasted. This house, worn as it was, held the weight of my sacrifices. It was where I had measured every dollar, where I had chosen to go without so my son could have more. Sitting there now, I realized how easily those years of giving had been dismissed. I remembered every step of David's journey, each one built on the foundation I provided. When he was accepted into college, I signed a check for $60,000 to cover his tuition. I told him then, "Study hard, son. Your mother and I want you to have every chance we never had." He nodded, grateful, or at least I thought he was. Later, when he graduated and wanted a car to drive to his first job, I bought him a brand-new sedan for $25,000. I even polished the hood myself before handing him the keys, proud to see him standing there with his future ahead of him. When he and Rachel moved into their first place, I quietly transferred $150,000 for the down payment. I told no one. I only wanted him to feel secure, to feel that his father had built him a strong foundation. Each check I signed, each hour of work I pushed through, I thought it was love. I thought it was building a family legacy. Tonight, as I sat in that quiet room, those memories no longer warmed me. They burned, because I finally understood how little those sacrifices meant to him now. The irony was bitter. David and Rachel thought they were about to inherit a life they never built. The Langston Tower penthouse, worth $24.5 million, was the jewel of everything Margaret and I had worked for. Back when the tower was only a sketch in a developer's portfolio, we took a risk. We put in our savings, every cent we had, believing it would rise and change the city skyline. It did. For decades, that building stood as a symbol of boldness, of faith in the future. Margaret used to say, "One day, this will be our gift to the family." And it was, but not in the way David imagined. He and Rachel liked to parade around, telling their friends that the penthouse was a wedding gift from Rachel's wealthy family. I had heard them brag, their words dripping with entitlement, their eyes flashing with the arrogance of people who thought fortune was owed to them. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the deed. The papers, every legal string of that penthouse, still sat under my name. I never boasted about it. I never needed to. But now their lies have turned my silence into something else. It became my weapon. I couldn't shake the memory of Rachel walking through this very house for the first time. She stood in the living room, glanced at the old furniture, the wooden floors I had laid with my own hands, and whispered to David, "Outdated. Everything here looks outdated." She didn't even lower her voice enough to hide the contempt. I pretended not to hear, but her words cut like a blade. Later, when we discussed the wedding, I suggested displaying some family photos. Rachel shook her head sharply. "It doesn't fit our aesthetic," she said. She wanted clean lines, curated images, nothing personal. And so the pictures of Margaret cradling baby David, the photos of birthdays, graduations, and family trips were all dismissed, erased, as if our lives were clutter she could sweep away. Each slight built on the last, stacking into a wall of disrespect, I could no longer ignore. I turned my eyes to Margaret's portrait now, her kind gaze watching over me. My chest tightened, and I whispered into the empty room, "They're erasing me, Maggie. They're erasing you. But I won't let it happen. I won't let them bury the years we built, the sacrifices we made. Not like this." The words cracked in my throat, but speaking them gave me strength. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own family. I felt the stirrings of resolve. I rose and walked to the study. The light there was softer, filtered through heavy curtains, and the smell of old books and polished wood clung to the air. Against the wall stood the safe I had opened only a handful of times since Margaret's death. My fingers spun the combination, the sound of the tumblers clicking into place louder than the silence that surrounded me. Inside, neatly organized in folders, were the documents that held the truth. I pulled out the file marked Langston Tower. There, in black and white, was my name, Victor Worthington, owner of the penthouse, deeds, certificates, and financial statements, every proof of ownership stacked in my favor. I traced my finger over the signature line. It was as though Margaret herself had stood beside me, reminding me that the legacy we built wasn't for others to twist or steal. Closing the safe, I sat down with the papers spread before me. My mind was no longer clouded with grief or shock. A sharp clarity replaced it. David and Rachel thought they had written me off, thought they could push me aside with a name tag and a seat near the restroom. They believed their lies would stand stronger than my truth. They were wrong. I could feel it in my bones. For every insult they had thrown, I had a page of proof. For every attempt to erase me, I had a weapon ready to remind them. The room seemed to change as I gathered the papers together. The old sofa no longer looked like a relic of the past, but like a witness, bearing testimony to what was rightfully mine. The photograph of Margaret wasn't just a memory. It was a call to action. I looked around that room, the wooden floors, the curtains Margaret had chosen, the clock ticking softly in the corner, and I felt the weight of every sacrifice, every decision, every dollar spent in faith. They thought I was finished. But I wasn't. I pressed the folder shut, my hand firm on the cover. In that moment, I knew this was no longer about a seat at a wedding. It was no longer about a word printed on a name tag. It was about dignity, about truth, about protecting the life Margaret and I had built together. They had turned their backs on me, betrayed the very foundation I gave them. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. I whispered once more to the portrait on the mantel, my voice steady this time. They will regret their words, Maggie. They will regret their actions, because this is just the beginning. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before sunrise, the house still and gray, the kind of quiet that makes every tick of the wall clock sound like a decision. I brewed coffee I barely tasted and sat at my desk with the Langston Tower file open in front of me. I had turned those pages 100 times in my head last night. Now I turned them for real. Deed, owner's affidavit, trust papers with my signature and Margaret's neat initials in the margins. The penthouse was not a rumor. It was mine. I picked up the phone and called Jonathan Avery. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice steady, professional, the way you want your attorney to sound when your life is being redrawn. I told him I needed a formal freeze on any transfer, license, or assignment related to the penthouse. He said we could file a notice of ownership confirmation with the county recorder and send immediate letters to building management, the HOA, and the tower's private concierge. He said we could revoke all decorating access and contractor permissions too. I said dodo all of it. He asked me to check my email and sign 3 documents. I refreshed. There they were, clean PDFs waiting on my screen like guard dogs. I signed one by one, my name steady, my hand firmer with each stroke. By the time the coffee cooled, the notices had gone out. Building management replied first. Acknowledgement received. Then the HOA records were updated. Then the concierge. We will not release elevator credentials or keys without your written authorization. I let out a long breath I had been holding for a very long time. Control. I had taken some back. I put the phone down, then picked it up again. There was one call I had to make, a call I had avoided because fathers shouldn't have to ask for respect from their own sons. I called David. He answered with music in the background and the kind of laugh that used to be mine when the world still felt simple. I told him I wanted to stop by later that day to drop off something meaningful for the wedding. He said, "Sure, Dad, but keep it quick. We're slammed." Then, as if reading from a script, he added, "Just come, sit, smile. Don't make a thing. Rachel really wants the vibe to be perfect." He said vibe like it was a sacred word. I looked at the watch on my desk and at Margaret's picture behind it. Perfect. I kept my voice even. I said I understood. I said I would be there, and I said I was proud of him. All of it was true once. Parts of it were still true. When I hung up, the room felt smaller, as if his words had sucked a little air out of it. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the city wake up. Trucks moved like beetles down the avenue. A woman in a red coat hurried by, coffee in hand. Life insisting on itself. That afternoon, I wrapped the pocket watch in tissue and placed it in the small wooden box Margaret had kept in her dresser. She had slipped that watch into my hand on our 25th anniversary and said, "Time is a promise if you keep it." I wanted David to carry that promise with him. I drove to the hotel where the bridal party was gathered for the rehearsal. The lobby smelled like cut flowers and furniture polish. Chandeliers glowed like they were holding their breath. I asked the concierge to ring David's room. He came down a few minutes later, tie loose, hair too perfect, his eyes darting past me before they settled. I held out the box. "I wanted you to have this," I said. He opened it and smiled, but it was a small smile, distracted. "That's nice, Dad," he said. He turned it in his hand, then glanced over his shoulder as Rachel stepped out of the elevator like a verdict. She looked at the watch as if it were an insect on a napkin. "We already picked a Rolex," she said, not unkindly, just cold, like a doctor telling you test results that don't change. This would mess up the aesthetic. Everything needs to align. She handed the box back to me, her nails immaculate. People walked past us, laughing, all of them moving toward the ballroom where a pianist was warming up. David didn't meet my eyes. He slipped his phone into his jacket and said, "We're late for the tasting, Dad. You don't mind, right?" As if I had been a stranger who'd asked for directions. I closed the box and nodded. "Of course," I said. "Of course." I put the watch in my pocket, where it sat heavy, as a truth no one wants to hear. On my way out, I stopped at the event office. A young planner with a headset and a clipboard smiled at me without looking. I told her my name. She ran a manicured finger down a list and said, "Right, yes, you're on table 19, near the service door. It's quieter there." My throat tightened. Quieter there. I signed the credit card slip for my parking and walked into the bright afternoon with the odd feeling that the sun had chosen to shine somewhere else. The next day, everything sparkled. The ballroom was dressed in gold and ivory, the flowers towered over the tables like expensive trees. Strings swelled while glasses chimed. I arrived 10 minutes early because I still believe courtesy matters. At check-in, a cousin I barely knew handed me a name tag without a glance. I clipped it to my jacket and moved away from the crowd before I looked down. Afterthought, all caps. There was no father of the groom anywhere printed in this room for me. I took it off and slipped it into my inside pocket behind the watch. I could feel both there, one paper light, one metal sure, labels fighting on my chest. A server walked past me and asked, "Are you with catering?" I shook my head and smiled, because that is what I have done my whole life when people were careless. I found table 19 on the floor plan at the door. The chair wobbled a little. The table linen had a tiny stain that no one else would have noticed. It was near the restroom. I sat quietly and folded my hands. The photographer moved from group to group, calling names that were not mine. The efficient, practiced lines under her breath. I watched David across the room, tall and handsome, the child I carried on my shoulders at county fairs and park picnics. He did not look for me. Rachel was radiant in the way a magazine is radiant. She took in compliments like a woman receiving her due. Someone toasted to the families, and Rachel's father, Leonard, raised his glass. He gave me a thin nod that came and went like a breeze that does not cool you at all. I took a sip of water. It tasted like the inside of the glass. When the first dance started, I stood halfway from my chair to see past a centerpiece so elaborate it blocked half the floor. The music swirled and people cheered. A cluster of guests near the gift table joked about envelopes stuffed with checks, about how this was what a real launch into married life looked like. I heard penthouse 3 times in one sentence. 24 and a half, one of the men said, tapping his glass. Now that's an address. I sat down again because standing suddenly felt like begging. A little girl broke free from her mother's hand and ran past my table toward the cake. She stopped, looked at me, and smiled. "Are you the grandpa?" she asked. I nodded. "I am," I said. Her mother called her back, apologizing as people do when their child wanders near the edges of adults who have forgotten how to be kind. I felt the watch press against my ribs. I placed my palm over it. Time is a promise if you keep it. The promise had been broken tonight, not by a watch, not by a name tag, by my son's silence. I excused myself and left through a side corridor where the music faded and the smell of bleach and warm plates replaced the perfume of celebration. A waiter with a tray stepped aside to let me pass. "Sir," he said, and I heard more respect in that one syllable than I had heard all evening. In the quiet of that hallway, with the hum of a refrigerator somewhere behind the wall, I took out my phone again and called Jonathan. He picked up on the first ring this time. I told him to send a second wave of notices, building security protocols, elevator key revocations, decorator cancellations, a direct note to the tower's general manager confirming that any furniture deliveries, design installations, or move-in scheduling required my written consent and my presence. He said he would do it now. I told him I wanted all correspondence blind copied to the wedding planner's office email on file and to the Whitmore Family Council, so there would be no misunderstanding about who owned what. He was quiet for half a second and then said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am." He said he would have it done within the hour. I thanked him and ended the call. On my way back to the ballroom, I paused at a mirror in a narrow silver frame. An old man looked back at me. The lines around his eyes were not a surprise. The steadiness in his mouth was. I walked in just as the toasts began. Rachel's sister told a story that did not include me. Leonard thanked the guests for supporting the couple as they build their life in the sky. Guests laughed. I pressed my fingers into the edge of the table until the linen bunched. When they invited the parents for a photo, the planner glanced past me as if looking for someone who mattered. "We'll catch Dad later," she said, and the words floated over me like a napkin tossed and forgotten. I touched the inside pocket of my jacket again. The watch, the name tag, one true, one false. I took the name tag out and turned it over in my palm. Afterthought. I said the word in my head, then out loud, a whisper I felt more than heard. Afterthought. I set it down beside my water glass and stood. No one noticed me leave. In the lobby, the air felt cooler, more honest. I sat on a velvet bench and watched strangers cross the marble floor as if they knew exactly where they were going. I thought of the first time I carried David into this kind of hotel, his face sticky from ice cream, Margaret laughing because our boy had knocked his cone onto his shirt and then tried to lick the stain. I closed my eyes and saw them as if they were walking toward me now. I opened my eyes, and they were gone. And there was only me, an older man with a straight back, a steady hand, and a folder waiting at home with the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 is in motion. He asked if I wanted to authorize a third step I hadn't asked for yet. a formal letter to the Whitmore Council stating that any reference to the penthouse as a gift or shared property was false and would be treated as intentional misrepresentation. I pictured Rachel's arched eyebrow and Leonard's soft, dismissive smile. I pictured David's eyes sliding away from mine. I typed, "Yes? Send it." I walked outside for air. The city was soft in the evening. A cab slid to the curb and a couple climbed in, her dress a splash of blue, his hand protective on her back. I stood under the hotel's canopy for a long time, not to think, but to let my thinking settle. They had chosen how to treat me. Now I have chosen what to do with that treatment. I spoke to Margaret then, not with my lips, but in that deep room inside where the best parts of you still live with the people you love. They think I lost, I told her. They think I am small and finished, but the game is just beginning. I went back in, not to be seen, but to see. I walked the hallway to the service elevators, where the building maps hung in glass cases. There was a diagram of the tower with emergency routes and access points. I traced the line of the private elevator that led to the top floors. That elevator would not move without my consent tonight, not for anyone who thought the world belonged to them because they wanted it to. I asked a security guard how long the reception would run. He said until midnight. He said there was an after-party upstairs. He winked like we were in on something together. Maybe we were. He didn't know it. I returned to table 19 when the cake was being cut. People clapped. A woman in a sequined dress leaned over my shoulder as she squeezed past and said, "Excuse me," the kind of excuse me that says, "Get out of the way." I moved my chair. My fork scratched the plate. I ate one bite of cake that tasted like sugar and expense. I drank water that tasted like nothing. Then I did something I have always done when I needed to hold my ground. I sat up a little taller. I set my hands on the table, palm down. And I waited. We took no family photograph with me in it. No speech of mine was requested. When the band started a fast song, the room filled with people I had paid to feed and entertain. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of money pretending to be happiness. When I opened them, I felt as calm as one can feel when a storm has finally decided to show itself. I took the name tag off the table and slipped it back into my pocket behind the watch. Paper, metal, lie, truth. The two pressed together. The story I would carry out of that room and into whatever came next. I left before anyone could say, "Where are you going, Dad?" as if the question held any care. In the corridor again, the same waiter stepped aside for me. "Good night, sir," he said, and I nodded because kindness, even small, ought to be acknowledged. I walked to the lobby, then to the exit, where a brass handle met my palm like a promise. Outside, the air was clean. A bus hissed. The city kept breathing. In the car, before I turned the key, I opened my email and read Jonathan's latest message. He had attached scans of everything we had filed that day. One more line at the bottom. "Do you want to blind copy the wedding planner and the Whitmore Council now, or tomorrow morning?" I stared at the words. Tomorrow morning would be cleaner, quieter, kinder. Tonight would be clearer. I hit reply. Tonight. On the drive home, I passed Langston Tower. Its glass face caught the city's light and threw it back like a crown. I slowed the car, slid into a side street, and turned off the engine. I sat there looking up at the floors stacked like cards at the top where the penthouse reached into the sky. I imagined Margaret's hand on my shoulder. "We built this," she would say, not in pride, but in a simple statement of what two people can do when they work and save and don't quit. I whispered into the dark, "We did." The traffic light changed and changed again. I stayed until I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Then I drove the last 10 minutes home. Inside the house, the air held the faint smell of the stew I had eaten the night before. I hung my jacket on the back of the chair, took the watch from the pocket, and set it beside Margaret's photograph. I placed the name tag I placed face down on the table. I poured a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink. Then I went to the study and opened the safe again, not because I needed to see the papers, but because I wanted to touch the truth. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. I closed the file and slid it into my briefcase. I placed the briefcase by the door. Action, not anger. Steps, not speeches. The phone lit up. A text from David. "Dad, everything okay?" He followed with another. "Rachel says you left early. You didn't say goodbye." I read the words twice. I typed and erased. I typed again and erased again. Then I wrote, "I had what I needed, son. I'll be in touch." He did not reply. I imagined him turning to Rachel, showing her the screen, both of them making the faces people make when they think they are right. Let them. A man who has found his center does not run after people who have lost theirs. Before bed, I stood at the window in the bedroom Margaret and I had shared for decades. The streetlight cast a pool of soft gold on the floor. The room was old and familiar. The quilt she had picked out was still on the bed, worn in the places where we used to sit and talk about nothing until it became everything. I spoke into the night, not loud, not desperate, just honest. "They think I'm weak," I said. "They think I will accept my place near the restroom, outside the picture. They think this is how my story ends." I paused and let the quiet answer me. "They will see. The real game starts now." In the morning, I would meet Jonathan at his office to sign one more document that would make the night's work irreversible. In the afternoon, he would send the final confirmations to the building. And in the evening, if anyone said the word penthouse, it would land in their mouths like a new language they did not speak. I turned off the light and lay down. Sleep came slowly, but it came. When I woke, I would carry my briefcase to the car. I would drive downtown. I would sit across from my attorney in a room of dark wood and clear windows. I would sign where he pointed, and I would walk out into the day holding what had always been mine. They didn't know it yet, but I did. I had the one thing that changed everything. Proof. And I was ready to use it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I remember the temperature first, the way the air dropped 10 degrees when I stepped off the gilded ballroom carpet onto the stone that led down to the wine cellar. Above me, strings and laughter and glass, bright and loud. Below me, the quiet hum of refrigeration and history. I needed the quiet. I needed stone under my shoes, not marble polished by people who didn't know my name. I took the back stairs, past trays of empty flutes, past a busboy who nodded like I belonged there. For the first time that night, I did. I hadn't planned to disappear. I had planned to sit in my assigned chair, to clap when I was told to clap, to swallow the word on my name tag like a tasteless pill. Afterthought. Then the family meeting happened. They called it small, informal. "Just a moment. Victor, step in here, please." A side room off the groom's suite, paneling the color of walnuts, and a lamp that pretended to be warm. Leonard Whitmore was already sitting, jacket open, like he owned air. Rachel leaned against the table, arms folded like a judge at the end of a long day. David stood beside her and stared at the carpet. The wedding planner hovered near the door with a clipboard, ready to orchestrate even this. Leonard smiled like a bank does when you walk in with the wrong paperwork. "Victor," he said, and tapped the folder in front of him. "We can keep this simple. You sign, we fast-track the transition, everybody wins, clean, respectful, for the kids." "What transition?" I asked. I asked it calmly. I wanted to give him a chance to say the true thing, to hear it in his voice and know what I was up against. "The penthouse," he said, as if it were a chair we were moving across a room. "We're aligning title with usage. It's a formality. Their future depends on this. Timing matters." Rachel looked past me and smiled at no one. "It's really not complicated," she said. "You said you wanted what's best for David. This is what's best." David didn't look up. He adjusted a cufflink he hadn't bought and swallowed hard. I looked at the folder. It wasn't a deed, it was a consent letter. It used words like assign and authorize and irrevocable. It used my name as if it were already an empty line. I put both hands on the back of a chair and watched my knuckles go white. "No," I said. One word, soft. Rachel's smile disappeared like a blown candle. Leonard's jaw tightened. David finally looked at me. For a second, I saw my boy, the one who cried when we burned the first batch of pancakes and laughed when we ate them anyway. Then he looked away. Leonard leaned forward. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We have guests. We have a schedule." "I know," I said. "You've been practicing for this, but I won't be practicing with you." I left before they could tell me I was being emotional, before they could remind me where my seat was. I left and took the stairs down to the place where I could hear my own steps again. The cellar was cool, the air clean. Barrels slept in rows. Bottles rested in their nests like dark birds. I found a metal-top table near a wall of limestone and set down my phone. I stared at the screen until my reflection steadied. Then I called Jonathan. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting in the hallway of my life all this time. "Victor?" "I'm ready," I said. The words scraped my throat on the way out, not because they hurt, but because they had been stuck there too long. "Full execution, ownership confirmation, notice to all parties, revocation of access, and Jonathan, blind copy the planner and the Whitmore Council. I want witnesses." He didn't ask why. We had spoken the morning after the rehearsal. He had the files ready. He only asked, "Electronic signatures acceptable?" "Yes." My phone buzzed with the first email before I could answer out loud. The subject line was a spine. "Owner's affidavit, Langston Tower, PH 57. Then another, Notice of Beneficial Ownership and Authorization Revocation. A third, Instructions to HOA Concierge and Building Security, Elevator Credentials. Each document crisp, each clause clean, each page a simple act of remembering who I was. I signed. DocuSign chimed like a seatbelt clicking into place. Then came the last one, the one that hummed under my finger. Amendment to Trust Records. Primary Residential Interest, Victor Worthington. I read the paragraph that mattered. It said what the truth always said, in plain words, mine. "Done," Jonathan said. "Sending to recorder now. I'll attach certified copies to the notice chain. The HOA will acknowledge receipt within minutes, concierge within the hour." "One more thing," I said. "Include a letter to Whitmore Council explicitly stating that any public representation of the penthouse as a gift is false and will be treated as willful misrepresentation." Use those words. Willful misrepresentation. "I'll draft it as a cease and desist with a demand for correction." Good. I could hear him typing, the click steady like a heartbeat that had found its pace again. "Victor," he said, quieter now, "I'm attaching a cover note from me to the wedding planner. It's neutral. It logs delivery time. It keeps this professional." "Thank you." When the emails left his server, the cellar felt different. The air didn't change. I changed. I picked up my phone and for a moment forgot how to breathe in the way a swimmer forgets the surface, then remembers, then breaks through. Upstairs, the music paused. A toast ended. Glass rang like thin bells. I scrolled to the copy of the letter we had sent to Whitmore Council and read it again, savoring the line that mattered. The one that said, "All decorating, moving, or access appointments are canceled effective immediately. No keys or elevator credentials shall be issued to any party without the written consent and physical presence of Mr. Worthington." It felt like writing my name on the door. My phone vibrated so hard it moved on the metal table. The wedding planner's address appeared. Then Rachel's. Then David's. Then an unknown number that had the same area code as Leonard's firm. I let them stack like plates. Then I opened the first reply that would matter later. The HOA's acknowledgement. It was boring, perfect, bureaucratic. "We confirm receipt and have updated our records to reflect Mr. Worthington as the sole owner." Sometimes justice wears a plain suit. I walked back up the stairs when the band started a new song. I didn't hurry. At the top of the stairs, I paused where the light from the ballroom spilled into the service hall and listened to the first crack. Rachel came around the corner like a storm that had been told to wait. "You," she said, "not my name, just you." "What did you send?" Her lipstick had bled a little at the corner, a red thread pulled from a seam. "Documents," I said. "Truth." "You can't do this," she said, voice high now, brittle. "You can't embarrass us like this. We have plans. We booked the decorator. The elevator code is disabled," I said, as of 6 minutes ago. David appeared behind her, pale in his rented tux, eyes blinking like someone who had stepped into the wrong room. "Dad," he said, voice low, as if this could be contained by tone. "Why?" "Because you asked me to sit still," I said. "Because you thought I would. Because someone needed to teach you what a boundary looks like when it is made of stone." He looked at Rachel. She stared at my phone like it had bitten her. Leonard arrived with the planner at his shoulder, and a man I recognized from a law firm website trailing him. He had his polite voice on, the one for donors and judges. "Let's be clear," he said. "Tonight is not the time." "It's exactly the time," I said. "You asked me to sign something in a back room 15 minutes before the cake. You can spare 5 minutes for clarity." The planner tried to smile. "If we could step into the green room—" "No," I said. "Here is fine." A server went past with a tray of empty plates. He looked between us, decided we were not his business, and kept walking. Good man. Know your job. Do it well. Leonard lifted his chin. "Victor, this is petty." "This is property," I said. Rachel's phone buzzed. She looked down, then up, and her face drained. "The concierge," she said, voice flat. "We've been flagged for no access." "Building management also acknowledged," I said. "HOA recorded. Recorder's office will post the updated affidavit in the morning." Leonard's lawyer cleared his throat. "We can remedy this. There's a path to mutually agreeable occupancy." "Mutually agreeable," I repeated. I liked the way the words tasted when they were mine. "We'll see." "You're hurting your son," Leonard said finally, dropping the polish. The line he thought would work, the line that worked on most men, raised to give and give until they forgot how to keep. "He's your family." I looked at David. I didn't see malice. I saw softness where the spine should have been. I saw a boy who took the shape of the nearest hand. It broke me a little. Then it healed me a lot. "Family tells the truth," I said. "Family doesn't erase you in the room you paid for." Rachel stepped forward. "This was a misunderstanding," she said, easing her voice down a key. "We were going to surprise you with a proper introduction later. Father of the groom and everything. It's a theme choice. The name tags were playful." "Afterthought is not a theme," I said. "It is a decision." The planner's headset crackled. Someone called her name. She looked at me with an almost human sadness, then left to catch a falling plate somewhere else. A door swung open, and a burst of laughter rolled down the hall, bright and empty. The man from Leonard's firm checked his phone and tapped furiously. "We can't do anything tonight," he told Leonard, not looking at me. "Recorder's after-hours queue reflects receipt. The revocations are effective on notice." Rachel's hands trembled. Her bracelet chimed when it hit the bone. "You're cruel," she said to me. "No," I said. "I'm clear." David took a breath that ended in a sound like a question. "Dad, we can talk tomorrow, right? Without all this." He gestured at the hallway, at the invisible wires now running through the building carrying my name like current. "Tomorrow is fine," I said. "But you should all know something before tonight ends." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the name tag. I held it so they could read the word printed there in small, perfect letters. "You wrote this for me," I said. "Tonight I wrote something for you. On the deed." No one spoke. The sound from the ballroom dimmed as the band took a break. For a moment, we were all just hearts in a hallway, beating, choosing. Rachel moved first. She grabbed David's arm and pulled him back toward the green room. "We'll fix this," she told him, her voice frayed. "He can't do this to us, not to me." Leonard followed. His lawyer walked and typed at the same time, which felt like the truest thing he did all night. I stood where I was and let the quiet fill me. I thought of Margaret in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon, telling me once that some fights are won before anyone throws a punch, just by showing up with your name spelled right. My phone vibrated again. Jonathan. I stepped farther into the cellar stairwell and answered. "You should know," he said, calm as a metronome. The building's general manager replied. "He's copied the head of security. They've confirmed they won't schedule any move-ins or decorator access without you. I've blind copied the wedding planner and Whitmore Council as you instructed. Also, the recorder acknowledged receipt of our affidavit in the night queue. It will timestamp at 12:01 a.m. "Good," I said. "Send one more. A simple letter to David, not aggressive, just clear. Tell him I remain open to a conversation. After tonight." "I'll draft it now." "And Jonathan," I said, "thank you." "Of course." I stayed in the stairwell for a long minute after the call ended. The cool air steadied me. I could hear a compressor kick on somewhere deep in the building. Work that gets done without applause. I put the name tag back in my pocket, paper against the pocket watch. Lie against truth. I closed my eyes and spoke to Margaret, soft and sure. "They wrote me off," I said. "I wrote us back in." When I returned to the lobby, someone was taking down a floral arch. Petals slid like soft coins to the floor. I walked outside and let the night find me. A cab pulled up, and an old couple climbed in, their hands touching for balance, for habit, for love. I stood on the curb and watched the tower rise beyond the hotel, its windows shining like a promise kept. I had done what needed to be done. The rest would be conversation. It came in pieces, the way storms do. First, a flurry of texts from numbers I knew and numbers I didn't. "You can't do this. We need to fix this. You're ruining the most important night of our lives." Then a call from David that I let ring until it fell silent. Then a voicemail from Leonard that began with the word disappointed and ended with the word consequences. Then finally a short message from Rachel. It said, "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Noon." She named a restaurant with white tablecloths. I wrote back one word. Diner. On the drive home, I rolled the window down and let the air cut through the leftover music in my head. I thought of how fast their faces had changed when the emails landed. I thought of how quickly confidence curdles when it meets a fact. I thought of Margaret in her yellow sweater, the one that still lived in the back of the closet like a hug. "We did it," I said out loud into the empty car. I meant we because I had never done anything alone that mattered. At home, I placed the pocket watch beside her photograph and set the name tag next to it, the word facing down. I poured water and drank it in 3 long swallows. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened Jonathan's draft to David. It was perfect, lean, and clear. "David, your father, remains willing to meet. He has confirmed ownership of the Langston Tower penthouse and has suspended all access and appointments until further notice. He asks that you contact him directly to discuss any future arrangement. Respectfully, Jonathan Avery, Eskimo." I read it twice and clicked send. Sleep slid over me like a coat that finally fit. Morning came with quiet light and a different kind of hunger. I put on a clean shirt, packed the Langston file, and drove downtown to Jonathan's office so we could ink real signatures on real paper. The conference room smelled like paper and faint lemon. The table was dark wood, heavy and smooth. Jonathan set the documents in a neat stack and clicked his pen. I signed where he pointed. Owner's affidavit. Notice of beneficial ownership, authorization revocation. Instruction letters. We made it irreversible. When we were done, he placed the documents in a large envelope with a clasp that snapped shut like a jaw. "Congratulations," he said simply. I nodded. It felt less like winning and more like repairing a roof before the rain. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city sounded new. Or maybe it was me. I checked my phone, a message from the building's concierge. "Mr. Worthington, per your instructions, we have canceled all decorator access for PH 57 and removed all elevator credentials associated with any other party. Please let us know when you'd like to schedule a meeting on site." I smiled, small and real. I typed, "Thank you. Next week." Noon came, and with it, the diner where the coffee is hot and the truth is hotter. But that's another chapter. Before I went in, I stood at the window and watched people eat eggs and talk with their hands. I thought of the hallway last night, of Rachel's bracelet chiming against bone, of Leonard's voice dropping the mask, of David's eyes looking for a safe answer and finding none. I thought of the moment when my name became mine again, not a courtesy, not a hope, but a fact. They had planned a future with my walls. I had reminded them who poured the foundation. As I reached for the door, my phone buzzed once more. It was an email from the recorder's office. The affidavit had been posted. The timestamp sat there like a stamp on my hand after a concert, ink that takes days to fade. 12:01 a.m., exactly when the day turned. Exactly when I did. I sat in a booth and ordered coffee. I waited. Rachel arrived late, without her glamour, shoulders set like she was carrying an invisible box. She didn't sit right away. She looked at me, then at the waitress, then at the sugar packets on the table, as if they might spell out a different answer. "You can't hold us hostage," she said finally. "I'm not," I said. "I am holding a deed." Her mouth tightened. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone." "You embarrassed me before anyone brought out the salad," I said. "I chose paper instead of anger. You should be grateful." She laughed once, sharply. Grateful. I didn't argue. I had learned that the shortest road to nowhere is trying to convince someone who profits from misunderstanding you. "We'll discuss terms," I said. "Not today. Soon." She sat. The waitress poured coffee. The cup steamed between us. I watched Rachel wrap her fingers around it like it might tell her what to say next. She swallowed and nodded. "Fine," she said. "We'll talk." We did not agree. Not then. But the ground had shifted. She felt it. I felt it. The booth felt it. That day would lead to conditions and signatures and a key that did not turn unless I said it would. But that is the business of Chapter 5. This was the end of the fall and the start of the floor. It was enough. I left the diner and walked a block out of my way to pass a playground where children were running in coats too big for them. Their laughter followed me to the corner. My phone stayed quiet. The city didn't care about my papers or their panic. It kept going, buses and birds and the same old wind down the same old street. I loved it for that. I loved it for reminding me that victory doesn't have to shout to be true. I went home and put the affidavit in the safe. I closed the door gently. I stood in the study and listened to the house breathe. In the mirror above the desk, a man stood straight, a man who had remembered that boundaries are not walls against love. They are lines. Love stays inside, so it doesn't drown. I looked at Margaret's photo and spoke out loud, because some words deserve air. "They thought I was weak," I said. "Now they see consequences." Outside, the light changed again, softer now, the kind that makes even old wood look warm. I sat in the living room and let time pass without asking it for anything. The name tag lay face down on the table. The watch ticked. The deed rested where it belonged. A good ending to a hard day. A door opening toward the next. Feeling invisible, dismissed, or written off by your own family is heavy, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and treated with respect, comment the keyword. Seen. Now watch what they do to change it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I chose the diner on purpose. Not the white cloth restaurant Rachel suggested, not a boardroom where Leonard could spread out his papers, but a booth that smelled of bacon and strong coffee, where the formica had been wiped so many times It had turned soft at the edges. I arrived early, ordered black coffee, and set the folder on the table. When Rachel walked in, her heels clicked too loudly for the place. She hesitated before sliding into the booth across from me. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the air between us carrying all the words we hadn't said at the wedding. I slid the folder toward her. "Read it," I said. She flipped it open, her manicured nails tapping the paper as her eyes scanned the first page. The color drained from her face, then came back hot. "This is a lease?" she said, voice rising. "You're asking us to pay rent on a home that was supposed to be ours?" "Not rent," I corrected. "Commitment. You can stay in the penthouse, but only if you give something back." I leaned forward, keeping my voice even. 15 hours a week, at the Mayfield Shelter for Women. It's not optional. It's the condition. She laughed, sharp and brittle. "You've got to be kidding me. You expect me to scrub floors with addicts and beggars?" Her words cut like glass. I kept my face steady. "I expect you to learn the value of what you've been handed. That shelter kept its doors open because Margaret and I believed dignity wasn't optional. You sign, you serve, or you walk away." I let the silence hang. The waitress topped off my coffee without asking, sensing a storm but knowing better than to interrupt it. Rachel closed the folder and pushed it back across the table, her lip curled. But then she saw the second page, the notarized amendment, the signatures, the clause that gave her no alternative if she wanted the address she'd boasted about to half of Manhattan. Her bravado cracked. For the first time that day, she looked small. "You can't," she started, but her voice faltered. "I already have," I said. I tapped the page. "You sign or you move. Choice is yours." She signed. Her hand shook, but she signed. The pen left a faint smear on the last letter of her name. For me, that blot was more honest than her entire performance at the wedding. The first weeks were almost comical. She arrived at Mayfield Shelter in designer clothes, clutching her phone like armor, sneering at chipped paint and linoleum floors. She tried to cut corners, to show up late, to vanish early, but the women there had seen every trick. They handed her a mop, a stack of donated clothes, and a crying toddler with a cough that didn't care who you were married to. Rachel complained. She rolled her eyes. She called it demeaning. Yet every hour was logged, and every missed hour was reported directly to me. I never raised my voice. I only sent short replies. 15 every week. Weeks turned into months. Slowly something shifted. She stopped wearing heels to the shelter. She tied her hair back. One afternoon, she stayed after her shift ended to talk to a young mother whose face carried a bruise the color of old wine. I heard it from the shelter director, who called me later that evening. "She listened," the director said, almost in disbelief. "Really listened." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, letting the words settle. I hadn't expected a change. I had only demanded effort. But sometimes effort opens a door. Leonard's empire didn't survive the scandal. Word spread in the circles where reputation is currency. Everyone knew he had tried to wrest the penthouse through pressure and deceit, and that he had failed, publicly. Deals slipped through his fingers. Partners stopped taking his calls. Invitations grew scarce. He tried to laugh it off at first, but the city is merciless when it smells weakness. David, caught between loyalty and shame, floundered. His colleagues whispered about his wife, volunteering in a shelter as if it were a punishment. They laughed behind his back, and he heard them. His shoulders began to sag under the weight of their laughter. For the first time, he seemed to understand that silence was not strength. It was surrender. And me? I found a strange kind of peace. The penthouse remained mine, but I no longer needed to live in it. I moved into a smaller place, a condo on the edge of a park, where the windows let in the morning light and the kitchen held only what I needed. I sold off one property, donated part of the proceeds to Mayfield, and kept the rest in a trust that no one could touch. My mornings became quiet rituals, tea steaming in my favorite mug, the newspaper folded just so, the sound of children laughing in the park below. No name tag, no corners near the restroom, no erasure. Just me, whole, present. Sometimes when I walked through the park, I thought of Margaret. I imagined her hand in mine, her smile when we signed the deed all those years ago. I looked at the trees swaying in the wind and whispered, "We kept it, not for them, but for us." The peace of those walks wrapped around me like a quilt. Rachel changed more than I ever thought possible. She no longer scoffed at the shelter. She began organizing drives, using her connections to bring in donations. She spoke less about designers and more about the stories she heard. One evening she called, her voice quieter than I had ever known it. "I thought it was punishment," she said, "but it's teaching me things I didn't want to see." I didn't comfort her, I didn't scold her. I only said, "Keep going." That was enough. David struggled with her transformation. The woman he had married to elevate his place in society was now spending hours folding clothes in a shelter's basement. He didn't know how to hold both versions of her. He drank more. He skipped meetings. He looked like a man whose compass had spun. Leonard fared worse. I heard he had moved into a smaller apartment uptown, a far cry from his townhouse. His calls to me went unanswered. He tried once to apologize, leaving a message that began with excuses and ended with silence. I never returned it. Boundaries, once set, are not walls of cruelty. They are fences of survival. I knew then that the war was over, not because I had destroyed them, but because I had reclaimed myself. They could circle in their own storms. I had stepped out into the sun. One morning, while making tea, I looked at the old name tag I had kept in the drawer. Afterthought. I smiled, not bitter, but with the understanding that it no longer defined me. I said out loud, I was never an afterthought. I was the foundation. My voice filled the small kitchen, steady and sure. For once, it felt like the walls agreed. The lesson wasn't complicated. Family by blood can betray you. They can forget what you built, what you gave, what you sacrificed. But character is yours alone. Boundaries matter more than titles. Respect is not owed because of relation. It is earned by action. And dignity, once reclaimed, tastes sweeter than any toast at any wedding. I didn't need their apologies anymore. I didn't need reconciliation to prove my worth. I had peace. I had purpose. And I had Margaret's memory alive in the work I continued to do. When Mayfield Shelter asked if I would join their advisory board, I said yes. Not because I needed a title, but because I finally understood what my next chapter would be. Helping others keep their dignity. Building, again, in a different way. That evening I sat on my balcony, the park below glowing in the twilight. The city hummed, restless as always, but I was calm. I lifted my tea and whispered, "Here's to us, Margaret. Here's to never being erased." And for the first time in years, the weight I carried since her passing felt lighter, as if she had nodded back. They thought they had buried me under humiliation. Instead, I planted myself deeper and grew taller. The penthouse stood in my name, but the real victory was here, in the quiet, in the morning light, in the truth that no one could take. And tomorrow, I would walk into that shelter, not to check Rachel's hours, but to meet the director about a new program. Purpose has a way of finding you once you stop chasing approval. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. The mornings in my new apartment have a softness I had forgotten life could hold. Sunlight falls through the tall windows and lies itself gently across the wood floors, as if reminding me that there are still beginnings, even at 65. The park below hums with life, children chasing one another, couples walking their dogs, joggers keeping rhythm with the season. I sit on my balcony with a cup of tea, steam curling in the autumn air, and I breathe freely. No weight on my shoulders, no hushed whispers behind my back. Only peace. This is the life I reclaimed. I started joining a volunteer group at the Mayfield Shelter, not because I had to prove anything anymore, but because it gave me purpose. A man at my age needs more than property and quiet afternoons. He needs a connection. So I found myself among others my age, retired teachers, veterans, and women who had raised children on their own. We shared stories over boxes of donations, laughed at our own stiff knees as we stacked shelves, and comforted strangers who had lost everything. Some afternoons I stayed after hours just to listen, because listening became my new form of wealth. I also began writing again, keeping a journal of the lessons I had learned, not about stocks or real estate, but about survival, dignity, and the unseen cost of silence. A few younger men at the shelter asked me about investing, and I shared what I knew, but I always ended with the same line. Money will come and go. Your name, your character, that's the only investment you carry to the grave. The lesson from everything I went through settled in me like stone. The penthouse, the money, the deals, all of it mattered far less than the one thing Margaret used to whisper to me when times were lean. Respect, Victor. That's what lasts. I had spent decades building things for others, carrying their weight, only to be labeled an afterthought at my own son's wedding. Now I understood with a clarity that felt both painful and freeing. Property could be stolen, manipulated, or fought over in courts. Respect had to be demanded, protected, and lived. Tai san lon kong quan trong bang han pam vasu ton trong, I thought. Wealth means nothing if the people closest to you see you as disposable. From time to time, I still hear pieces of news about them. Leonard, proud Leonard, was forced to sell off several properties. Rumor had it he owed more than he let on, and creditors stopped treating him like a man of influence. He was no longer invited to the tables where decisions were made. David and Rachel stayed in the penthouse, yes, but it had become a glass cage. Rachel continued her required volunteer work because the contract left her no choice. At first, she endured it, but I knew from whispers at the shelter that something inside her had begun to change. She still came with expensive coats, but now she carried bandages in her purse too, and she no longer rolled her eyes when a woman told her story. David struggled to keep up appearances. He smiled at parties, but people whispered that he looked tired, hollow, caught between shame and resentment. Their world was shrinking while mine was opening. One morning, a letter arrived. I recognized David's handwriting immediately, though it looked unsteady. He wrote pages of apologies, of explanations, of regret. He said he hadn't known how to stand up to Rachel, how to resist Leonard, how to face me. He said he was sorry for the name tag, sorry for the silence, sorry for everything. I read it twice. I set it down beside my tea, and then I folded it and placed it in the drawer with the name tag that once read, Afterthought. I did not reply. I whispered to myself, I don't need their apology. I have myself. The words filled me with a peace no reconciliation could ever bring. And what would I tell those who listened to my story? To the parents watching, never let your sacrifice be taken for granted. Love your children, yes, but do not hand them your dignity like spare change. Protect it, hold it tight. To the sons and daughters, never forget who laid the foundation under your feet. The house you live in, the schooling you finished, the food you never worried about. It came from someone's weary hands. Do not turn those hands away when they tremble with age. And to anyone asking about the nature of people in this modern world, greed will always tempt us to forget one another. But character is the one possession untouched by time or theft. It is the compass that decides whether we walk toward light or shadow. One quiet afternoon, while unpacking a box I had ignored since the move, I found Margaret's old journal. Tucked inside was a note she had written in her careful script. Remember, Victor, silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. I sat there for a long time, holding that piece of paper. It felt like she had left it for this very season of my life. I placed it on my desk where I could see it every morning, a reminder that my choices now were not made in anger, but in wisdom. The park outside shifted colors as the season deepened, orange and red flames in the trees, children leaping into piles of leaves. I joined the neighbors sometimes, older men like me, sitting on benches, sharing thermoses of coffee, laughing at the folly of politics or the price of groceries. They treated me as I was, a man among men, no labels, no erasures. Each day became evidence that I had chosen correctly, that walking away was not defeat, but freedom. I do not speak to David. I do not see Rachel. Leonard has vanished from my circles completely. The fence is drawn, and I have no desire to cross it. That is not cruelty. That is survival. That is respect for myself. And respect, I now know, is the ground upon which every healthy love must stand. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit on the balcony with Margaret's picture on the small table beside me. The city glitters, restless, never sleeping, but I feel no urge to be part of its chaos. I watch the park grow quiet, the street lamps flicker on, the air turning sharp with cold. I whisper, "We made it, Margaret. We were never afterthoughts. We were always the foundation." My words are not heavy. They are light, almost like prayer. And if you ask me the truest lesson, I would say this: sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from holding on, but from letting go. Letting go of the need to be understood by those who refuse to see you. Letting go of apologies that come too late. Letting go of battles that steal your peace. Because in the end, dignity is not given, it is chosen. I finally chose mine, and in that choice, I found everything I had been missing. The story has come to an end. It has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.